There are nights when wealth means nothing. Nights when a locked gate, a marble floor, a name carved into the side of a hospital wing, all of it counts for less than a single warm cup held out to a hungry child. Daniel Whitaker did not know it yet, but this was going to be one of those nights. It was alone in the front room of a house too large for the life inside it, when he heard a small voice on the other side of the door. It did not knock the way salesmen knock, or the way neighbors knock. It knocked the way fear knocks. Soft. Uncertain. As if the hand behind it already expected to be turned away. He set down his glass and crossed the room. He opened the door only halfway, the careful gap of a man who had learned to keep the world at arm's length. On the porch stood a little black girl, no more than 9 or 10, holding a baby boy against her chest. She was small, and thin, and so tired that exhaustion had stopped looking like exhaustion and started looking like stillness. Her coat hung open at the throat. One of her braids had come loose along the side of her face. The little boy's head rested heavy on her shoulder, his cheek turned into her neck, quiet, but quiet in the wrong way. Quiet the way children go when hunger has worn them past crying. She looked up at the man in the doorway with a frightened politeness that somehow made her seem even smaller than she was. "Sir," she said. "I'm only asking for a glass of milk." Daniel did not answer right away. And in that silence, she rushed on, the way a child rushes when she believes silence is the first shape of no. "Not money," she said. "Just one glass. And if you don't have a whole glass, half a glass is okay. It's for my baby brother." Daniel stared at her. Then he looked past her, out into the dark. There was no adult on the walk. No car idling at the curb. No parent waiting in the shadows to see how the trick would land. There was only the long white porch, the black lawn beyond it, and the soft yellow circles thrown by his security lights onto empty grass. "Where are your parents?" he asked. "We live with our grandmother," she said. "That's not what I asked." The girl swallowed. And then she told the truth in the plain way that only a child can, the way that leaves no room to maneuver. "I don't know where my mother is, sir. And I don't know where my father is, either." Being Daniel, a second voice. His wife, Clyde, came toward the door, pulling her robe tighter against the night air. "Daniel, who is it?" "A child," he said, still watching the girl. "Asking for milk." Clyde looked over his shoulder, and her face changed. Not into cruelty, exactly. Into something more careful than that. The guarded weariness of a woman who had lived long enough in a beautiful neighborhood to learn that beautiful neighborhoods attract beautiful lies, and who wanted this particular surprise removed from her doorstep, quickly, before it could become anything she would have to feel. Daniel turned back to the girl. "What's your name?" "Anye." "And him?" "Noah." "Anye. Why are you here?" "I saw your light was still on. So I knocked." "That doesn't explain why you're on my porch." "I knocked other places first," she said. "The brick house on the corner." Nobody came. "The house with the blue door." A lady looked through the curtain, and then the lights went out. "A man across the street told me not to stand on his porch. Then I saw your light, and I thought, maybe," she stopped. Embarrassed, suddenly, by the size of her own small hope. "Maybe you'd have some milk." And here the old caution rose in Daniel, slow and cold, the way it always did. Because he had money. And money attracts stories. So many of those stories are true. Many of them are simply well rehearsed. A man in his position learns, over the years, to see a danger where other people see a need. He had been sued for trying to help. He had been lied to by people who had practiced making their voices tremble. He had watched his own kindness get turned around in someone's hand and used against him like a borrowed knife. So when he spoke, it was the voice of caution that spoke first. "Anye," he said. "You can't go door to door at night, asking strangers for things. It isn't safe." "I know." "Then you need to go home." "I can't." "Why not?" "I'm lost." "Then you need to find an adult." I tried, she said. There's no other way. Clyde let out a quiet breath beside him. Daniel, she said. This is exactly why the neighborhood put up the sign. She raised one hand and pointed past the porch, toward the black metal post near the front gate, lit by the camera mounted above it. The white letters were easy to read, even from where they stood. No soliciting. No loitering. No trespassing. Private residence. Violators will be reported. Clyde's voice stayed smooth. But there was steel underneath the smoothness. That sign is there for a reason. We don't let people wander up to this house in the middle of the night asking for food or money. We just don't. Anya looked at the sign. Then she looked back at Claire. And what she said next landed harder than any argument could have. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't know what loitering meant. Clyde folded her arms. It means you shouldn't be standing here. And Daniel watched the sentence land on the child. Anya did not cry. She did not flinch. She simply shifted the baby higher on her hip, and nodded, the way a student nods when a teacher corrects her in front of the class. Yes, ma'am. I should have closed the door then. Clyde expected it. The sign expected it. The whole carefully guarded street, with its cameras and its codes and its quiet agreements, expected it. Instead, Daniel asked another question. Why aren't you with your grandmother? Agnes eyes came up fast. She's at the hospital. Which hospital? St. Mary's. How did she get there? And now the words came faster, with the breathless urgency of a child trying to make the adults understand before the adults grow tired of listening. Mrs. Palmer was downstairs. Grandma got sick in the kitchen. He wasn't home yet, the bus got stuck, I was late from school. And when I got home, Mrs. Palmer said an ambulance already took her away. And the baby? I had to bring him. There was nobody to leave him with. Mrs. Palmer wrote it all down for me. She said to wait for her grandson to drive us. But Noah needed to eat. And I thought I could find the hospital myself. He had the paper. He followed the streets. But I don't know this part of town. And then I got lost. Something moved in Daniel's face. Used slightly. You have the paper? Anya hesitated. Then she nodded. With one careful hand, still balancing Noah in the crook of her other arm, she reached into her coat pocket and drew out a folded square of notebook paper. It was worn soft at the creases. A smooth hit gray from being gripped too hard, too long, by a child who had been holding onto it like a map of the only safe place left in the world. She held it out to him. Daniel, Claire said quietly. Don't take anything from her. But Daniel had already taken it. He unfolded it under the porch light. The handwriting was uneven, but legible. Blue ink. Hard pressure marks where the pen had dug into the page in a hurry. St. Mary's Medical Center. Emergency Department. Cardiac unit. Patient, Lillian Mae Johnson. Brought in by ambulance, around 6:20 p.m. Never contact, Mrs. Alberta Palmer, apartment 3B, if Annie comes home, tell her grandma is at St. Mary's. What for Mrs. Lewis to drive her? Do not let the children walk alone. Daniel read it once. Then he read it again. Clyde watched his face. What does it say? He turned the paper slightly so she could see, and his voice came out low. The little girl is telling the truth. And for the first time that night, Claire's expression faltered. Anya stood very still on the porch, as if she somehow understood that the truth needs silence to do its work. Daniel looked at the note one more time. St. Mary's. Cardiac unit. Lillian Mae Johnson. The name touched something far back in him. Something faint, and old, and not yet shaped into a memory. It was like hearing a few notes of a song through the wall of another room. Familiar. But out of reach. He looked back down at the child. You walked all this way following this? I tried to follow the bus road first, she said. Then the road split. I asked a lady at a gas station, but she didn't know. Then the stores started closing. And Noah got heavy. So I started knocking on the houses with the lights on, because I thought maybe somebody could just tell me which way to go. She paused. I wasn't trying to break your sign. Clyde looked away. And Daniel asked one more question. I already knew the answer would hurt. I asked it anyway. Why only one glass? Anya looked down at the baby in her arms. Because one glass is enough for him. And you? She gave a small shrug. Too tired to make it brave. I can fight it better. Fight what? Hunger. She nodded, simply. I'm older. Daniel felt his wife's eyes on the side of his face. And he felt the house at his back, too. The warm air pouring out the open door. The polished floors. The refrigerator standing in the kitchen, packed full of food that nobody in that house would miss, food so plentiful that half a glass of milk had become, somewhere along the way, completely invisible to him. Clyde chose her words carefully. Daniel. If the child needs help, we can call family services. That's what those programs are for. We can't just take children into the house. Anya turned toward her at once. I don't need to stay, ma'am. I just need milk for Noah. And maybe somebody to point which way the hospital is. I won't touch anything. Daniel folded the paper once. He held it in his hand. And he said, very quietly, Clyde. There is milk in the refrigerator. Her lips parted. But she said nothing. He turned back to the girl. Come inside. Annie didn't move. I promise I'll drink water, she said. Noah just needs, I heard you, Daniel said, softer now. He'll have milk. And you'll have something too. I don't have money. I didn't ask for money. She studied his face, still uncertain, looking for the trap that adults usually hide somewhere behind a kind word. Are you calling somebody to take us away? No. And he meant it. He looked once at the sign by the gate. Then at the folded paper in his hand. Then at the child on his porch, who had just apologized to him for being hungry. Clyde said his name one more time. A warning, and a question, and a plea, all in 2 syllables. Daniel. He did not turn around. She's coming in. Anya stepped over the threshold the way some children learn to step into the world. Carefully. Apologizing with her whole body. She held her shoulders in, so as not to brush the wall. She watched her own shoes, so as not to track dirt across the floor. She moved like someone who had learned, early and hard, that grown people can change their minds over very small things. The light in the front hall fell full across her face, and up close, Daniel saw it plainly. She wasn't sleepy. She was depleted. There is a difference, and he recognized it. Noah lay against her, breathing slow. Daniel closed the door behind them. And for a strange, suspended moment, the 4 of them stood together in the bright entryway. The billionaire. His wife. The lost girl. And the small boy whose hunger had quietly steered all of them into the same room. You're really going to drive them to St. Mary's, Claire said. It was not quite a question. Yes. Anya looked up at him. You know where it is? I do. Will they let me see Grandma? Daniel glanced at the name on the paper again. Lillian May Johnson. The faint bell rang a second time, a little clearer now, and still not loud enough to name. If she's there, he said, we'll find her. He led them toward the kitchen and told Annie she could sit. But she looked to Claire first, asking with her eyes for a permission no one had offered her. Clyde was still standing back, arms crossed, robe knotted tight. The note had softened her face, but only a little, and not enough to call it welcome. She was a woman who believed in order. In rules. In systems that kept a lab from turning messy. And 2 lost children in her kitchen, at midnight, fit none of the systems she trusted. It's all right, Daniel said. That stool, there. Annie climbed onto the edge of it with great effort, keeping Noah in her lap the whole way up. And then, without being told, she folded her legs so that the baby's shoes would not touch the white cabinet beneath the counter. Daniel saw it. And he pretended not to. Because there are kinds of dignity that only grow smaller when you point at them. He took down a small saucepan, poured in the milk, and set it over a low flame. The act felt clumsy in his hands. Foreign. He could not remember the last time he had warmed milk for anyone. Claire came up close beside him, dropping her voice. Daniel. You need to call St. Mary's before you do anything else. I will. Right now. He glanced over at Annie. Let him drink first. She gave you a note. That doesn't mean we know the whole story. No, he agreed. But it means we know enough not to put her back outside. Her mouth tightened. She didn't argue. Maybe because there was no honest argument left to make. Instead she opened a cabinet, took down a clean mug with a brisk, busy impatience, as if usefulness might protect her from having to feel anything. Daniel poured the warm milk and set it on the counter. Careful. It's warm. Annie touched the side of the mug first, testing the heat the way a grown woman would. Then she lifted it to Noah's lips. The baby drank slowly. Both of his small hands wrapped the cup, though it was clear that Annie carried most of its weight. His eyelids fluttered. A faint color crept back into his cheeks. Daniel watched in silence. After a few swallows, Annie tried to take the mug away. He can have more, Daniel said. He had some. There's a whole carton. She looked at him as if she could not decide whether he was telling the truth or testing her. Grandma says don't take more than you need. And what do you need? She looked down at her brother. For him to stop being hungry. And you? I already told you. He can wait. Clyde turned her face away. A small motion. But Daniel caught it. So many answers make it very hard to keep being practical. He opened the refrigerator again. He took out a container of soup, sliced turkey, a wedge of cheese, a bowl of strawberries Claire kept for her breakfasts. He poured the soup into a pot and laid bread on a plate. Anya watched the food pile up with rising alarm. That's too much, she said. It's just food. I didn't ask for food. No. You asked for milk. I'm adding soup. I don't know if Grandma can pay you back for all that. Daniel stopped, his hand on the pot. Nobody is asking your grandmother to pay for soup, he said. Anya lowered her eyes. She doesn't like owing people. That makes 2 of us. Clyde his head. Turned sharply at that, as though the answer had come from a part of her husband she had not expected to meet tonight. Daniel ignored the look, and stirred the pot. What happened when you got home from school, he asked, keeping his voice flat and even, so the question would not feel like an interrogation. Mrs. Palmer was in our kitchen. She lives upstairs. She had her coat on, and she was holding Grandma's purse. He thought Grandma was at the store. But Mrs. Palmer said she got real sick. She said the ambulance came and took her. Did Mrs. Palmer stay with you? She tried. But she had to go back up, because her husband can't be alone too long. So she wrote the paper. She said Mr. Lewis from the corner store would drive us when he closed up. But Noah kept saying Nana. And I thought, if Grandma woke up and we weren't there, she'd be scared. She doesn't like hospitals. Clyde's expression flickered. So you left before Mr. Lewis came, she said. Anya nodded. I thought I could follow the paper. You can read all that? Daniel asked. So me, she said. I know St. Mary's. I know road. I know Grandma's name. And I know numbers, if they're not too long. Daniel looked down at the paper he had set beside the stove. The address was nothing to him. He read it without effort. But for the first time he tried to imagine the same words in a child's hands, in the dark, on a corner where the stores had gone black, and he felt the distance of it open up beneath the page. "How far did you get?" he asked. "I got on the bus first." He turned around. "You took a bus?" "I had $2 in my backpack. Lunch money Grandma let me keep. The driver told me where to get off. But I got off in the wrong place, because Noah dropped his sock, and I bent down to pick it up, and when I stood back up everybody had moved, and the doors closed, and the bus just left." "Good Lord," Claire murmured. Anya glanced at her, unsure whether she had done something wrong. "You didn't do anything bad," Daniel said. "You were trying to reach your grandmother. I was supposed to wait. You were trying to get to family. That's not the same thing as disobeying." He set a small bowl of soup in front of her, with a piece of bread on the side. "Eat. A little." Anya looked at the bowl. Then at Noah, who had gone soft and heavy against her now that the milk had done its work. "Can he have soup?" "When it cools. You first." She shook her head. "Clyde is Said." And then, almost against her own will, she said something gentle. "Anya. You're going to fall right off that stool if you keep pretending you're not hungry." Anya studied her for a long moment. Then she picked up the spoon. She took one small careful sip, as though the soup belonged to someone else, and she had permission only for the edge of it. Daniel used the moment to make the call. He stepped a few feet away, but he stayed where Annie could still see him, because he did not want her thinking he had slipped off to summon some stranger who would come and carry her away. The hospital operator transferred him twice. The third person he reached listened faster the moment he said his name, and that, more than anything, bothered him. It always did. "This is Daniel Whitaker," he said. "I'm calling about a patient. Lillian May Johnson. Brought in by ambulance around 6:20 this evening. I have her granddaughter with me. Anya." The nurse on the line went quiet for a beat. "You have Annie?" Daniel looked over at the child. She had stopped eating. "Yes." "Oh, thank God," the nurse said. And the relief in her voice was real, unmistakable, the kind you cannot fake over a phone. "We've had security looking. The neighbor called twice. The man who was supposed to bring the children never showed up with them." "Is Mrs. Johnson there?" "She is. She's in cardiac evaluation. I can't give you details over the phone unless you're family." "I understand. I'm bringing the children in." "Please do." "And, Mary Whitaker, yes." The nurse's voice softened. "Tell Annie that her grandmother has been asking for her. Every time she's awake enough to speak." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. "I'll tell her." He hung up. He turned back around. Anya had set down her spoon. Her face had gone still in that terrible way a child's face goes still when she is bracing for the bad news before anyone has even said it. "She's there," Daniel said. "Your grandmother is at St. Mary's." Anya's hands tightened around Noah. And then she asked the question that struck him harder than is she alive ever could have. "Is she mad at me?" Daniel crouched, so he was closer to her level. "No," he said gently. "The nurse said she's been asking for you. The whole time." Anya's chin trembled once. She swallowed it down. She woke up. "Some. Can we go now?" "Yes." She slid off the stool at once, nearly losing her balance, because Noah was still heavy in her arms. Daniel's hand came out by instinct, then stopped, just short of touching her. "I'll carry him, if you want." Anya pulled the baby closer. Daniel nodded, and let it go. "All right. You carry him." Claire had been standing by the counter the whole time, watching. Her face was no longer hard. It was troubled now, which was something different, and something better. Daniel, she said. Let me come with you. A looked at her, surprised. She tugged her robe tighter, then shook her head at herself, as if catching her own reflection in a mirror she had been avoiding all night. Not like this, she said. Give me 5 minutes to change. Anya looked between the two of them. You don't have to come, ma'am. Clyde met the child's eyes. And for the first time that whole night, she seemed to actually see the girl, instead of the problem the girl represented. I know I don't, she said quietly. That's exactly why I should. While Claire dressed, Daniel slipped the paper into his coat pocket and went out to bring the car around. As he stepped into the garage, he heard her behind him in the kitchen, opening a drawer, pulling out a napkin, wrapping the bread that Annie hadn't finished. For later, she said, a little awkwardly. And Annie answered, thank you, ma'am. In the garage, Daniel opened the rear door of the black SUV and switched on the inside lights. The leather in the back glowed pale and spotless, and just, because no child had ever ridden in it. He stared at the latch system built into the seats, the one he had never once had a reason to notice, and felt, absurdly, that the car itself was judging him. Claire came out with a coat thrown over her clothes and her hair pulled back. Anya followed, Noah tucked under a blanket Claire had taken from the hall closet without a word about it. Daniel helped the girl up into the seat, careful not to touch her unless she reached for him. Clyde climbed in beside her, but left a little space between them, offering her presence without pressing it on the child. It was the first truly wise thing she had done all night. As the SUV rolled out of the garage, the headlights swung across the sign by the gate. No soliciting. No loitering. No trespassing. Daniel looked at it once, in the mirror, as it slid past and vanished into the dark behind them. And he said nothing. Being him, Annie whispered to the baby. We're going to Nana now. The hospital was 20 minutes away. Daniel knew the route by heart, because his company delivered to St. Mary's twice a week. He had read its contracts. He had toured its executive wing. He had shaken the hand of its board chairman, and written a check large enough to have his own name engraved on a wall beside the new surgical center. But tonight, for the first time, he was driving to that same hospital through the eyes of a child who had tried to reach it with a folded scrap of paper and a hungry baby in her arms. And seen that way, the road felt much, much longer. He drove faster than he usually allowed himself. Not recklessly. Years of discipline kept his hands steady on the wheel, even as something unfamiliar pressed up against the inside of his chest, asking to be named. The city at that hour was stripped down to its bones. Traffic lights blinked yellow over empty intersections. Storefronts stood dark, except for the occasional gas station or all-night diner, glowing like small lonely islands in the black. Atlanta after midnight was not a city of ambition anymore. It was just a place where only the necessary things stayed awake. In the back seat, Claire stayed turned slightly toward Annie. Every so often she adjusted the blanket, or checked whether Noah had room to breathe. She didn't say much. But her silence had changed. It no longer pushed the child away. It made room for her. You okay back there? Daniel asked, watching them in the mirror. Yes, sir, Annie said quickly. You can lean back, if you're tired, Claire offered gently. I'm not tired. But her eyes told another story entirely. Daniel didn't challenge it. He knew a little something about pride. Especially the particular kind of pride that comes from having had too little, for too long. How long until we get there? Annie asked, quieter now. About 15 minutes. We're close. She nodded, and he could almost see her counting the minutes off in her head, one by one, like coins. Do you know what part of the hospital your grandmother's in? Clyde asked. Anya shook her head. The paper just says emergency, and hard place. Cardiac unit, Claire said softly, more to herself than to the girl. That usually means they're watching her closely. Is that bad? Clyde hesitated. And for a second, Daniel thought she might retreat into something big and safe. But she didn't. It means they're taking it seriously, she said. That's a good thing. Anya seemed to accept that. The car went quiet again. But it was not the same silence as before. This one had weight to it now. And direction. Daniel turned onto Peachtree Hollow Road, and the shape of St. Mary's rose up ahead of them, tall and pale, lit from the inside like something alive. The emergency entrance glowed beneath a wide awning. Ambulances pulled in and out. Doors slid open and shut in a rhythm that never quite stopped, the steady mechanical heartbeat of a place that never sleeps. Daniel pulled up close and parked. This is it, he said. Anya leaned forward, her eyes locked on the building. And there was something in her face he recognized. Not fear, exactly. Something harder than fear. The awareness that whatever happened in the next few minutes would matter more than anything that had come before it. I'll go in first, he said. You stay here 1 second. Her hand tightened around Noah. I can come. You will. You just need to speak to someone, so they don't make you wait out here again. Claire touched the girl's arm lightly. He's right. Let him go ahead. Anya nodded, though every line of her body hated the idea of being left behind, even for a moment. Daniel crossed quickly to the sliding glass doors, and the air of the emergency room hit him as he stepped through. Cool. Sterile. Carrying that faint antiseptic smell, and something heavier underneath it. He had walked into hospitals many times. But never like this. Never without an appointment. Never without his name already waiting for him at a desk. The nurse at the front looked up. I'm here about Lillian Mae Johnson, he said. Her granddaughter Annie is with me, out in the car. Recognition flickered across the woman's face. Your Mr. Whitaker. He nodded once. The children are safe. He didn't want to bring them in until I knew where to take them. Bring them in, she said. The grandmother's been asking for that little girl every time she opens her eyes. We get them to her as soon as we can. Daniel turned and went back out without another word. Annie was already standing on the curb, Noah in her arms, scanning the great pale wall of the building as if she could see straight through it to the woman inside. They're expecting you, Daniel said. And Annie did not wait for anything else. She moved toward the doors with quick, careful steps, like a girl afraid of slipping out of the moment before it was finished. Inside, the hospital was louder than it had seemed from the curb. Voices crossed over one another. A stretcher rolled past. A machine beeped somewhere down the hall, steady, patient, keeping time. A staff member came to guide them. This way. They moved down the corridor, past doors marked with words Annie didn't know, past people sitting with tired eyes and folded hands. And Daniel noticed how many of them looked up as the group went by. Not because of him. Because of her. A child, moving through a place where children usually arrive carried in someone's arms, walking instead on her own 2 feet, with a purpose far too heavy for her size. Near the turn toward the cardiac unit, the guide slowed. She's just ahead. Anya stopped for a second. Daniel looked down at her. You ready? She nodded. But her voice came out small. What if she doesn't wake up? Daniel chose his words the way you choose your footing on ice. Then you'll still be there. And she'll know that. Anya held on to that. They reached the room. Through the glass panel in the door, Daniel saw an older woman lying in the bed. Her skin pale against the white sheets. Her hair thin and silver on the pillow. Machines stood around her, quiet but constant, lines and wires tethering her to the world she was still holding on to. Anya stepped forward. Nana. The word was barely louder than a breath. But something in the room shifted when she said it. And as Daniel looked at the woman's face, something inside him finally moved. The thing that had been circling at the back of his mind all night long, faint and out of reach, came rushing forward at last. Not in fragments now. Whole. A roar. Latte at night. A wreck. Twisted metal. The taste of blood in his own mouth. Headlights at the wrong angle. The cold creeping up his legs. And a voice. A woman's voice. Low, and steady, and absolutely unwilling to break. Don't you close your eyes. Stay with me. You hear me? Stay. Daniel drew in a sharp breath. Clyde heard it. Daniel? But he couldn't answer. Because for the first time that whole night, he was not looking at a stranger in a hospital bed. It was looking at the woman who had once refused to let him die. And standing in front of her was the child who had knocked on his door asking for nothing more than a glass of milk. The nurse pushed the door open, and Annie slipped inside before anyone could say a word, moving with a quiet urgency that did not belong to a child but to someone who had already learned, far too young, that hesitation can cost you the thing you love. She went straight to the bed. Still holding Noah, she rose up on her toes, just enough to see over the rail. Nana. The woman did not open her eyes right away. But her fingers twitched against the thin sheet. A small movement. Almost nothing. To Annie, it was a shout. I'm here, she whispered. I came. I got lost. But I came. Claire stepped in behind her, slow, careful not to crowd the room. Daniel came last, and stopped just past the doorway. Because he did not entirely trust his own legs to carry him any closer. Nana, Annie said again, softer now, coaxing the old woman back from somewhere far away. You told me not to be late. The woman's eyelids fluttered. And Daniel felt it before he saw it. That shift. That fragile crossing from one side of consciousness to the other. He had seen it once before, years ago, from the opposite side of a bed. Back then, he had been the one lying still, slipping in and out of the dark, and someone else had been the voice refusing to let him go. The woman's eyes opened slowly. Clouded with pain and exhaustion. But they focused. Fierce on the ceiling. Then the wall. And then, as if drawn by something stronger than effort, they landed on Annie. Baby, she whispered. Annie's whole face broke open. Nana. You're here. You're awake. Yes, child. I'm here. The woman's gaze drifted, searching. The boy? Annie shifted Noah so the old woman could see him. He's right here too. She let out a fragile breath that carried more weight than any full one could. Thank the Lord. And then Daniel found himself moving, without deciding to. He crossed the room and stopped at the side of the bed, looking down. Up close, there was no doubt left in him at all. The years had changed her. Lined her face. Seen her down. But the structure was the same. The strength was still there, under all the weakness. And the voice, quieter now, carried the same unbending steadiness he remembered from the night that should have been the last night of his life. You, he said. Barely above a whisper. The woman turned her head toward him. It took her a moment to find his face, to set the man standing beside her bed against a memory buried under a decade of ordinary days. Daniel didn't rush her. He didn't say anything more. He simply stood there, in the light, and let her see him. Her brow furrowed. And then, slowly, recognition came. Not sharp. Not all at once. But real. She began, and her voice caught. The road. Daniel nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Her eyes widened, just a fraction. You made it. The same words. The same quiet certainty she must have spoken into the dark, 10 years ago. Obeyed a stranger's broken body. Because you wouldn't let me die, Daniel said. The room went still. Anya looked between them, confused, but alert, sensing that something enormous had just walked into the space and stood down among them, without yet understanding what it was. Lillian studied his face, confirming what her memory was already telling her. You cleaned up real good, she said faintly. A breath of something like a smile moved through the room. You look exactly the same, Daniel said. That's a lie. Yes, ma'am. It is. Anya tugged at her grandmother's sleeve. Nana. You know him? Lilian's eyes came back to the child. I do, she said. I met this man once. A long time ago on a bad night. Daniel leaned closer. You pulled me out of a car 10 years ago, he said. Out on the service road, behind this very hospital. You stayed with me until the ambulance came. You held my head off the ground, and you wouldn't let me go to sleep. Lillian's expression softened with the memory. You were bleeding bad, she murmured. I remember. He told you not to close your eyes, and you went and did it anyway. She shook her head, the faintest motion. I never thought you'd remember an old woman in the dark. I didn't forget you, Daniel said. And then, more honestly than he had meant to, I just never found you in time to say thank you. Lilian looked at Annie. Then at the baby. Then back up at the man she had once kept alive on the cold edge of a road. Well, she said. Looks like you found me now. The words landed gently. But underneath them was something far heavier than the moment. Something about timing. About the way certain things have a habit of coming back around, exactly when they are needed most. Nana, Annie said quietly. We got milk. Lilian blinked. Milk. Noah was hungry. So I went out to find some. He knocked on doors. And I found his house. She nodded toward Daniel. He gave us milk and soup, and then he drove us here, to you. Lillian's gaze returned to Daniel, and something in her face shifted. Not surprise. Not even gratitude, exactly. Something quieter than both. The recognition of a balance, long out of true, beginning at last too. C'était level again. You didn't have to do all that, she said. Daniel shook his head slowly. Yes, ma'am, he said. I did. A nurse stepped in to check the monitor, and her face was kind but careful. We'll need to limit visitors now, she said. She's stable. But her heart is under a lot of stress. She needs rest. Anya nodded at once, the way she nodded at every instruction, as if obedience were the one thing she could always offer. But she didn't let go of her grandmother's hand right away. Lillian's thin fingers curled weakly around the girl's. You stay close, she murmured. I will. Don't go wandering off again. Y won't they, Nana? And this time, the words were not just obedience. They were a promise. Out in the corridor, the doctor found them. It was somewhere in his late 40s, tired but sharp-eyed, a man who had clearly spent too many nights in places like this and had learned to carry urgency without ever letting it tip into panic. Mr. Waitaka. I'm Dr. Harris. He glanced down at his tablet, then back up. Mrs. Johnson is in a fragile state. We're still running tests. But it appears she suffered a serious cardiac event tonight, and there may be conditions underneath it that we need to look at more closely. Is she going to be all right? Annie asked, very quietly. Dr. Harris crouched, bringing himself to her level. We're doing everything we can. And she's strong. That helps. Annie held onto the word strong like it was something solid she could stand on. The doctor stood and turned back to Daniel. We'll need to move her to a monitored unit soon. There may be more tests. Possibly a procedure, depending on what we find. And Daniel understood what the man was not quite saying out loud. There would be costs. Hospitals do not run on kindness. They run on systems. Billing codes. Insurance approvals. Decisions made far away from the bedside, by people who will never see the patient's face. Does she have coverage? Daniel asked. The doctor hesitated, just long enough to answer the question without speaking it. There are some gaps in her file. What does that mean? Clyde asked, and this time her crossed arms held concern, not impatience. It means, the doctor said carefully, that certain treatments may require authorization. And that can take time. Dime. Daniel looked over at Annie, sitting still as stone, her hands wrapped around her brother, her eyes fixed on the closed door of her grandmother's room. She did not understand insurance. She did not understand authorization, or delay. She understood only one thing. Waiting. And in that moment Daniel understood, with a cold and sudden clarity, that in a place like this, waiting itself could be the difference between everything and nothing. How much time? He asked. The doctor began to explain the limits. The approvals. The advanced intervention that might require. Daniel cut him off gently. Don't wait. Dr. Harris studied him. Do whatever needs to be done, Daniel said. Whatever it is. Don't let paperwork slow you down. Mr. Whitaker, I can't authorize, I can. The doctor glanced at him. You're not listed as family. Daniel looked once more at the closed door, then back at the man in front of him. I'm the reason she lived long enough to need treatment, he said. It was not quite accurate. But it was not wrong, either. He reached into his coat and drew out a card, and handed it over. Call whoever you need to call. Run whatever you need to run. And if it ever comes down to a choice between waiting and acting, you act. The doctor looked at the card. Then back at the man holding it. And something in his expression changed. Not deference, exactly. The recognition of certainty. I'll make sure the team knows, he said. Do that. When he had gone, Claire turned to her husband. That was a lot. It was necessary. You don't even know the whole situation yet. I know enough. She studied him for a long moment. You've been in hospitals before. You've seen how this works. And you're stepping in anyway. Daniel looked over at Annie again, small against the long row of chairs, holding the baby as if letting go were not one of the options available to her. She came up onto my porch with a piece of paper and a child in her arms, he said quietly. She already did the hard part. What followed was the longest night Daniel could remember. They moved Lillian upstairs, to the cardiac floor, where the noise of the emergency room fell away and the air turned cool and controlled, where urgency did not vanish but only sank deeper, hidden beneath routine. Annie would not leave. She sat in the chair beside the bed, her hand returning again and again to her grandmother's, refusing sleep, refusing fear, refusing anything that might pull her attention from the woman in the bed. And somewhere in those small hours, Claire crossed a line she had not planned to cross. She sat down beside the girl. She unwrapped the bread she'd carried from the house. You didn't finish this, she said. And Annie, after a long pause, took a piece. It was a small thing. But Daniel watched it happen, and he understood that something in his wife had quietly turned, and would not be turning back. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms folded, and let the truth of it settle over him at last. 10 years ago, a woman with no reason to stop, no obligation, no protection, had knelt down on a dark road beside a dying stranger and refused to let go of him. Tonight her granddaughter had knocked on his door and asked for half a glass of milk. And he understood now, with a clarity that arrives only a few times in a life, that some debts do not come with an invoice. Some debts come back to you wearing a child's worn coat. And this one was not going to be delayed, denied, or left waiting in a chair outside a closed door. By morning, the cardiologist had a name and a plan. Dr. Reynolds. He laid it out plainly. A significant blockage. Years in the making. A procedure that carried risk, but far less risk than doing nothing at all. You should do it, Nana, and he said. Lillian gave the faintest smile. You always this bossy? Yes, ma'am. That drew the smallest sound of laughter from Claire, the first of the whole long night. We'd like to proceed today, the doctor said. The sooner the better. Do it, Daniel said. We'll need consent. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. Lillian looked at him for a long moment. You sure about that? Daniel met her eyes. Yes, ma'am. I'm sure. And she studied him, the way she had studied the road. That night long ago, weighing the odds, and then she gave a single small nod. All right, then. They took her in a little while later. Anya walked alongside the moving bed, refusing to let go of her grandmother's hand until the very last possible second, until the doors of the procedure suite reached the line past which she could not follow. This is as far as you can go, the nurse said. Anya stopped. Her hand lingered in Lillian's for one final moment, then slipped free. I'll be right here, she said. I'll be right back, Lillian answered. It was a promise neither of them could truly guarantee. But it was a promise they both needed to hear. The doors closed. And the waiting began. Daniel did not pace. He stood, very still, his stillness its own kind of tension. Clyde walked a few steps and then back again, unable to settle. And Danny did not move at all. She sat with Noah curled against her, her eyes fixed on the doors, and once, very softly, almost to herself, she whispered, she said not to leave people waiting. Daniel heard it. She won't, he said. And when the doors finally opened again, after what felt far longer than it should have, Dr. Reynolds stepped out, and looked at the three of them, and spoke the only word that mattered. The procedure went well. The tension in the hallway broke. Not loudly. Not all at once. But it broke. Anya's shoulders dropped for the first time since the doors had closed. She exhaled, a long-held breath finally let go. She's okay. She's stable. We were able to clear the blockage. She need time to recover. But this was the right step. Annie nodded, accepting every word without needing more. And as they stood there, outside the doors that had held everything in balance only minutes before, Daniel understood something with absolute clarity. The hardest part was not over. But the direction was set. It was no longer here only to get this family through one bad night. It was here to make sure they never had to face a night like it alone again. Later, while Lillian rested in recovery, Daniel stepped a few feet down the hall and finally took out his phone. The screen lit up with a whole world that had been waiting. On him. Missed calls. Emails. Reminders. He ignored every one of them, and dialed a single different number. It rang once. Mr. Whitaker. Tom. I need you to clear my schedule for the next several days. Move it, delegate it, cancel it if you have to. And I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Lillian May Johnson. Her medical records. Her housing. Her finances. Quietly. I pause on the line. Understood. Is this a new case? No, Daniel said. It's personal. That was all Tom needed to hear. This was not how Daniel usually worked. He planned. He structured. He controlled outcomes before they ever had the chance to unfold. But this was different. This was not a thing he had set in motion. This was a thing that had already begun, 10 years ago, on a dark road, and had simply taken this long to come back around and find him. The day Lillian left the hospital did not feel like an ending. There were no speeches. No dramatic goodbyes. Only a quiet series of small, deliberate movements that carried more weight than any ceremony could have. Papers signed. Instructions reviewed. A follow-up appointment set, every detail handled, nothing left uncertain. Clyde had taken over the careful work without anyone asking her to, checking the bag at the foot of the bed, making sure nothing important was left behind. She had found her place in all of it, without quite announcing that she had. They drove first to the small apartment, to gather a few things. It was clean, and modest, and full of the quiet order of a woman who had spent her whole life making a little go a long way. Anya moved quickly, taking only what she truly needed. A small bag. No things. A few folded clothes. Clyde, watching her, gently added the items Annie had not thought to take. An extra pair of shoes. A small framed photograph from the shelf. We don't need all that, Annie said. Clyde smiled. You might. Lillian stood in the doorway, taking it all in one last time. This place did what it could, she said. It did, Daniel agreed, stepping up beside her. But it isn't enough anymore. No. She looked at him. Then we don't come back to it the same way. No, ma'am, he said. We don't. The draft that followed was different from every draft that had come before. Anya leaned back into the seat, her body finally letting go of the tension it had carried for so long it had forgotten it was carrying it. Noah slept peacefully against her. Claire rested a hand on the girl's shoulder, a gesture that had somehow become natural. After a while, Annie spoke. Mr. Daniel? Yes. Are we still allowed to knock on your door? The question was simple. But it held everything that had brought them here. Daniel glanced at her in the mirror. You won't need to knock, he said. She frowned it, just slightly. Why not? Because you'll already be welcome. She thought about that. And then she nodded. The car turned onto a quiet street, lined with trees, and pulled into a long driveway. The house stood ahead of them, its windows catching the afternoon light. And one light, just inside the front hall, was already on. Anya noticed it immediately. You left it on, she said. Daniel switched off the engine. I told you I would. She smiled. Not wide. Not loud. But real. They stepped out of the car together. And this time there was no hesitation at the door. No uncertainty. No need to ask. Daniel opened it, and instead of a barrier, it felt at last like what a door is meant to be. An entrance. A place where no one has to stand outside, in the cold, wondering whether they will be turned away. Annie walked inside, Noah in her arms, Claire beside her, Lillian following slow but steady. And Daniel paused for just a moment on the threshold. He looked at the light. At the warm space it filled. At everything it had come to mean in the span of a single night. Then he stepped in, and closed the door behind them. Not to shut the world out. But to hold something new, and fragile, and worth keeping, safely in place. Because some doors are meant to stay closed. But others, once opened, are meant to stay that way. This story is a quiet reminder that kindness is never measured by how much we give. It is measured by whether we choose to act at all, in the moment when it would be so much easier to look away. A single small thing, an open door. A warm cup held out in the dark, can change the whole course of a life in ways we will never be able to predict. It reminds us, though, that the world is not always fair. That the child should never have to carry a baby brother through a cold city, knocking on locked doors, just to find a glass of milk. And yet it reminds us that ordinary people still have the power to set a small piece of that unfairness right, through nothing more than courage, and attention, and the willingness to stay. Most of all, it reminds us that real help is not a moment. It is a commitment. When we choose not to turn away, when we decide to keep the light on long after the emergency has passed, we become the very thing that someone else has been searching for, out there, in the dark. This is a work of fiction, created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are imagined. They do not represent any real people, or any true story. This content is intended for storytelling and emotional reflection only.